Our studio guest is Dr. Jonathan Tripp. 2 weeks in a row, in fact, which is apparently he's handling most of the rotation right now. It's like being a big league pitcher and everyone asks you to pitch.
That's right. Well, actually, I feel more like the substitute because the others that come in definitely come in with smart brains and good ideas. But I can do basics, and today we're going to talk about the basics about
This is
wellness
wellness care,
exams.
yeah. Which,
Yeah,
which your insurers generally are pretty good about looking. That this is one area where if you do this, they don't necessarily charge you a lot as an individual to go get that wellness checkup.
actually, most policies now provide at least a once a year wellness exam with no out of pocket cost to the patient. So there's no disincentive financially, if you do this. The recommendation is do it. It's a freebie, so to speak. Nothing's really free with insurance. You are paying for it,
Right,
but
right.
bottom line is they won't charge you any more out of pocket like a regular exam for a sore throat or something. So yeah, wellness is a big deal, and I want to go through details of the different types of wellness exams from small children, infants on up, adults, and then those of us that have made it to 50 and what changes there. But as I think about this, I was driving into the show and I thought, what's the real incentive? It's good to know where you stand, but what's the real incentive? And in my opinion, especially if you're approaching middle age or beyond, you don't want to be the one in the nursing home. You don't want to be the one with the home health aide that is, feeding you and bathing you and things like that that come about because of a stroke or heart failure or heart attacks that lead to heart failure, and so that you're just completely incapacitated. Um, I commend the people that serve in those capacities, but frankly, I don't want to be one of the reasons they're employed. Not me personally. So, what do we do to stay out of that? And wellness exams are really a good way to catch things early, to be able to make changes, to be able to stay out of long term trouble. And it's not a guarantee, but people that do wellness exams and keep in touch with what's going on with their blood work and physically and maintaining their weight and watching blood pressure and all those things really do live better and live longer. So if it's about quality of life, this is really important as well.
When we're talking about children, especially the younger ones, this is a way you can also though detect some things like congenital defects, or you can do a number of different tests, and a lot of things when children are very young like that can be corrected, and then they won't be a problem as they grow into adolescence and then adulthood.
I have a perfect example, a young little boy who's about 3 years old now. When he was first born, seemed to be the typical newborn kiddo. They're not great at holding their head up, but who is it 2 weeks,
Hmm.
things like that. But as we got farther into his development, at about 6 weeks and then at 8 weeks, we finally made a decision, said, this kiddo needs more than the average because the head control is just not there. The rest of the body seemed to be doing okay, but it was as if the kid's head was too big for his neck. And so, with some therapy, really over about a 6 month period, 6 to 9 month period, all the muscle strength, things like that, were developed. The mental wise, the child has good cognitive function, and so I now see him as a 3-year-old that runs around my office, and has no respect for any part of the office. And that's exactly how I want kids to be in my office. They feel, safe, they feel free. This is basically they're coming to play. And that, so he is a great example of we caught something early on because we were doing his 2 week and then his 1 month and his 2 month wellness exams. And mom expressed a little concern, and I actually could see the lack of difference in his development because he'd been there for the early exams. So that's a great example for children.
I was going to say, too, when the child comes in, you already have a checklist of issues you're looking for, right?
Yeah, there's a whole, depending on their age, there's a different list of developmental milestones. So that's one of the things that we really look for in kiddos. To begin with, probably the first thing we ask the parent is, do you have any concerns about how your child's doing? Whether that's the, growth or their behavior or development. Every parent that has a teenager has a question about their behavior, but that's just part of being a teenager.
And we're going to get into this in the next segment of the program about differences between these visits between the children and adults. But as you say, the idea is to find, and no matter what age people are, find things in advance.
Yeah, no, as early as you can get to finding things, the better because changes are easier when they're early.
In other words, somebody who might be a ticking time bomb for certain health issues, if you find it, get them immediately on a course correction, could save their lives.
Yeah, it frequently does. We kind of joke about it. We'll have small things like somebody comes in with a wart and we, freeze the wart or whatever, and we'll joke in the office about another life saved. But in reality, when you have somebody that has uncontrolled hypertension or, uncontrolled diabetes, or, sometimes it is a skin lesion that you look at and you remove that, it truly is saving lives, even though they weren't at death's door, or at least they didn't know it.
We have more with Dr. Jonathan Tripp coming up from Tripp Family Medicine in just a moment. And we'll be talking about wellness visits as well as those for adults and distinctions too between men and women. That's on the way in just a few minutes. It is Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And of course, we'll take your telephone calls as well in the next segment. Bill Colley answering the telephones this morning. Dr. Jonathan Tripp is our studio guest. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine this morning with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we're talking about wellness visits and one area of potential change, and that is wellness visits for women. And of course, I think you've addressed this before. People will say, well, how come sometimes I'm told something's bad, then I'm told later it's good? Because we get a bigger body of research constantly, and that will change things. But we have a change in the way wellness visits are being done for women.
We have, and it's about 3 years ago that several bodies came out and said, "Hey, we really don't need to do breast exams as often as we need to, or as we've thought we need to, because all of my life, or at least all of my training life, women were supposed to do self breast exams every month, like clockwork, and once a year breast exam, which they still recommend the annual breast exam." And we'll talk about mammograms later. But there was a huge study now, probably 6 years ago, that came out. Um, it's about 44,000 women, but it was done in China. So, the U.S. medical body is suspicious of anything that happens outside of the U.S., which has good reason because a lot of times those studies aren't well designed or well controlled. But what they found is women that did a quarterly breast exam, so 4 times a year, was as good at picking up cancers and as early as picking up cancers as if you did it every month. So frequently in my office, I'll ask a patient, female patient, how often you do breast exams, and before they can even answer, because usually they hesitate because they know they're supposed to do it every month, I'll say, let me take a little guilt away from you. You don't need to do it every month. And they have a look of surprise. And when I say, you only need to do this 4 times a year, often the response is, well, I can do that. But, they feel guilty every month that they miss. And so that's a fun change. And it's good to know that you're not putting yourself at more risk. Mammograms, let me just kind of talk about those a little bit. For a long time, we've said everybody 40 and above should get a mammogram every year. For about the last 4 or 5 years, there's been big debate depending on which medical body you ask or what study they come up with. The consensus now is everybody after 50 should do a breast exam, not a breast exam, but a mammogram every year. And if you have any family history of breast cancer, that you ought to start at 40 and at least get mammogram at 40 and at 45, and then every year thereafter at 50. But for the conservative and concerned person, you can still do one at 40 and at 45 without a family history of breast cancer. But for sure, if you have that family history, you should do that sooner. And everybody else, you can start at 50 and feel, as long as you're doing your own breast exams and the annual breast exam with your family physician, that's probably the best answer at this time.
You're looking, and I'm sure when you're dealing with the difference between the sexes, obviously for sometimes radically different things in a wellness visit. So with men, you're primarily dealing with issues of high blood pressure, heart health, things like that, unlike maybe what you're looking more at cancer with women.
Well, the truth is all of those things we're looking at with men and women. Obvious things that are different are women don't have a prostate, so when we talk about doing an annual rectal exam, which is recommended after age 50, for the guys, we're checking a prostate as well as checking the stool for blood, which is a screen for colon cancer. So you have a colon cancer and a prostate screening in about a 10-second moment of embarrassment. For women, the same exam for rectal cancer or colon cancer is mainly a screening of um, the stool for blood, and that's there's a difference there. But it is true that men tend to hit the heart disease earlier than women. But nevertheless, we're still screening both, and part of that screening comes from blood work that we're doing. So let me talk a little bit about. Well, actually, the only other thing is I wanted to tell women that the annual pap smear has changed as well in about the last 3 years. And that is if you're over 30, what they consider monogamous, meaning no more than one sex partner for years, and you've had no abnormal pap smears for the previous 10 years, and you've had at least 3 pap smears in those 10 years, then you are able to back off to at least every 3 years instead of annually, and in some cases every 5 years up until about age 65, after which we tell you it's up to you if you want to do it. So there's definitely a lot less worry about did I miss my pap smear in the last year. If it's been 3 years, it's time to get it for almost everybody. So, but that's another one that it feels a little better to not have to do that every year. Um, Let me tell you about annual or what I call preventative blood work. Preventative just means we're screening for things. And so, what do we generally want to look for? Well, we want to look for blood sugar. Is it too high? Do you have diabetes? Or are you pre diabetic? This is a great one to catch early because often, just with diet and exercise, you can step yourself away from going towards diabetes. And that's a big deal about heart and brain when we talk about heart attack or strokes, let alone kidney function or loss of kidney function. In fact, to speak about diabetics, they usually don't die of diabetes. They usually die of kidney failure or heart attacks or strokes because diabetes increases the risk on all of those. So when we do blood work, blood sugar is one of them, kidney and liver function, and these are really simple and inexpensive tests. In fact, if you're paying out of pocket for the test that I'm mentioning right now, and you do it at our office because, as far as I can tell, we're the cheapest lab in town. If you're paying out of pocket, these labs may cost in the neighborhood of about $60 to $80. In the old days, 10 years ago, I'll call those the old days, just a simple thyroid test that I do was 110 by itself. And so, in my opinion, these are very inexpensive and very powerful screening labs. So, blood sugar, kidney and liver function. We're looking at cholesterol because if your cholesterol is high, that it ramps up the whole heart disease process or what's called peripheral vascular disease. So, some people actually lose circulation in their legs or their arms, and then they have lots of trouble with how they can function. And then the last two that I've written down is anemia. So that'll play a lot with your energy. Your immune system is part of that one. And thyroid. A thyroid screening is really key for anybody that says, I'm just not feeling energy or I'm feeling run down or I'm gaining weight or if it's too fast, I have heart palpitations and I'm feeling anxious and I have trouble sleeping, that can be your thyroid. So, when somebody comes in and says, I have a lot of anxiety, it isn't always our first reaction to say, well, let me put you on medicine for anxiety. It's, well, let's see if there's something that's causing it.
Now, I want to point out Dr. Jonathan Tripp is in studio with us until 9 o'clock this morning. It's 8:51. We're at 34. We're talking, of course, today about wellness visits. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, News Radio 1310.com. 736-0300, our studio line if you're looking to reach us today. And contact information at your office, important.
Yeah, our office is on Fillmore, across from the post office on the north side of town. And our phone number is 208 933 4400. That's 208 933 4400. And our website is trippfamilymedicine.com. And Facebook, you can reach us at Tripp Family Medicine. So all of those are good ways for contact.
You also mentioned differences in people's ages when they come in. I just read, I think, last week where there's now a belief we may have reached the limit on, extending life, and because there were some predictions we could keep going and going and going, but that may not be true. But as you get older, naturally, the system does tend to break down.
Yeah, there's lots of things that don't quite go well. I have a lady who's about late 70s, just went through a treadmill stress test to see if the shortness of breath or chest pain that she had was heart related. Well, her stress test looked like she had full blown clogged coronary arteries, so her heart was lacking blood supply. So within an hour, she was taken to what's called the cath lab. So she had a heart catheterization where they inject dye into the coronary arteries and then figure out where the clogs are. And what they found was only one spot that was only about 40%, clogged, if you will. And that's not enough to cause her troubles. Everything else was clear. So her response to me is, "So I have an excellent heart." And my response is, "Yes, you do. Absolutely." On the other hand, is a 77-year-old's heart as in good a shape as the 17-year-old's? And the answer is, no, there's not the strength, and there's other lower, smaller changes, smaller cell changes that are different. So for her age, she has an excellent heart. So there are things that are changing at a cell level that we can't just say, hey, why don't we put a balloon in there and make it look better like we can with the coronary arteries, which are pretty big. So that's one of the things we can do. And the person that needs a stent or opening of those arteries will often say, my energy has gone up as if I was 10 years younger. So that blood flow is important, but that's not the only thing going on.
On the other hand, I had a friend in his late 50s, and there is some you could help slow this because he ended up getting 6 stents put in his late 50s. Then he took up bicycling, and then within a year he was bicycling sometimes 35, 40 miles, and then back home, and totally radically changed his life at that point. And now that he's in his I guess he's now late 60s, he looks as if he's probably 15 years younger.
Yeah, no, lifestyle changes. It's not the stents that did it. The stents have allowed his heart to get better blood supply, but the rest of his body is a response to what he's doing. And that's really what we're after. When we talk about a wellness exam, we're screening for things. But what we're talking about during those exams are what are you doing to make your life better, your quality of life, your strength, and a lot of it has to do with exercise and weight loss. And so it sounds like basics, but the basics are what work and what make us live longer. Some of us have good genetics and some not so good. I'm a prime example where my 3 out of my 4 grandparents lived well into their 90s, and both of my parents died in their 60s. So, which side of those genetics do I want to be on? Well, I can skew that based on what I do. And so, am I a perfect example of health? No. But am I trying? You bet I am. So, that's a big part of how we hold our discussions at our office. And that is, if you're doing nothing, let's do something. And if you're doing something, should we be doing more? Are you willing to do more? And so it's not 0 to 60 in one day, but like your friend, he probably did. He had a heart attack.
We have just a couple of minutes left, but when you mentioned blood work, in the late 1990s, when I was going to the doctor for my checkups, I never had blood work ordered up. And then it seemed within a few years, I always had to do that in advance. Did something change in the medical community there?
In the 1990s, early 90s, I wouldn't know. I wasn't even in med school yet.
Right.
But no, from my understanding, the blood work has been kind of a standard that they might have said, as a younger man, well, we don't need to check that, don't need to worry about it. Because usually at that point, we were looking at cholesterol for the, 40, 50 plus crowd, the old people. And that's a little tongue in cheek. They're not the old people, at least not in my book. But what we found is even into preteens, we're identifying high cholesterol that is already causing plaquing. A big surprise was Vietnam War. They had biopsy or not biopsies, autopsies on these 18, 19, 20-year olds,
Mhm.
and we're all already finding cholesterol plaques. So that was a big heads up that hey, this starts early. This isn't the old man's disease. It just finally shows up as the older person. So
Uh,
let me tell you about some screenings, though.
yeah, we got about a minute left. So,
Okay. After 50, screenings, a colonoscopy every 10 years to avoid colon cancer. It is the single best test and the best look at avoiding colon cancer, and it's only every 10 years. Annual rectal exam for guys is checking the prostate and a screen for colon cancer. Excuse me. For women, still a screen for colon cancer by doing an annual rectal exam. Breast and mammograms annually after 50, and then the blood work we've kind of talked about to screen for quite a few things. And don't forget skin screenings. If you have something that's looking funny this right now, if you've met your deductible, it's a perfect time to get that taken off. So come to our office, let us take care of that, because we see skin cancer every day, and sometimes it's not a big deal, but once it's gone, usually you're done. So I got to put that plug in for the end of the year.
We want to thank Dr. Jonathan Tripp, and we'll do this all again next Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock.
Awesome.
Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Coming up in the next hour of Top Story, going to have a guest dropping by talking with us about some needs for the Rock Creek Fire District. That's on the way on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.